even I get jaded when I don't see results. And I think that's really the genesis behind Acoer is with a small but very capable team to build relevant, usable, and I think that's really, really important to us, usable, modern healthcare software. And where it makes sense, blockchain enable it. And what we're trying to build is real-time software that a consumer would expect to see on their mobile app as they would interact with, for instance, Facebook or whatever. So consumer-oriented experience. And we think that we are in that time for healthcare to do exactly the same.
Welcome to Hedera Hashgraph's Gossip About Gossip. If you are a developer, an entrepreneur, crypto enthusiast, or just trying to learn more about how distributed ledger technology and Hedera Hashgraph will impact your industry, then you'll love the episodes that we have coming up. Bookmark us, add us to your podcast app, and stay tuned.
Hey there, and welcome to Hedera Hashgraph Gossip About Gossip. I'm joined today by my Hedera colleague, Cooper Coons, a developer evangelist. Hey, Cooper, how's it going?
It's great. How's it going with you, Paul?
Yeah, lots of fun stuff going on. We're here to talk to our guest, Jim Nasr of Acoer. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Cooper. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, I mentioned lots of fun things going on, and no small number of those fun things are coming out of Acoer, particularly the dashboard and visualization you've created to help track the coronavirus. Can you tell us about Acoer and tell us what you're doing around the virus?
Yeah, absolutely. So really, Acoer is a software development company, Paul. Myself, Ben, our CTO, who I'm sure you guys are also aware of, and a number of the core team has been together for a number of years, actually through multiple if you like, projects and initiatives in healthcare. And you know, what we decided at the tail end of last year was we really, truly believe in some of the kind of the work we're doing, the mission that we have, and also that there's an opportunity. There's an opportunity for us, even as a little company, to make a difference, to try and make a difference, and put aside the rhetoric that everybody talks about, you know, in terms of patient outcome and innovations in healthcare and all these wonderful sounding sound bites, and actually demonstrate it. Because I speak around the world, you know, around innovation in healthcare and blockchain and things like this. And there are very many well-intentioned people speaking about these things. But even I get jaded when I don't see results. And I think that's really the genesis behind Acoer. With a small but very capable team to build relevant, usable, and I think that's really, really important to us, usable, modern healthcare software. And where it makes sense, blockchain enable it. And as you know, obviously, we're big believers in Hedera, and we really fundamentally believe that what we're trying to build is real-time software that a consumer would expect to see on their mobile app as they would interact with, for instance, Facebook or whatever. So consumer-oriented experience, and we think that we are in that time for healthcare to do exactly the same. So with that in mind, then Hedera really is a great platform where we're trying to, in my kind of mind, impute computational trust. So that's the story. That's really what we're trying to do. And we've been fortunate that we've had some early success, and some clients supported us. And then, you know, specifically about your question regarding the coronavirus, really that was an experiment. It was a suggestion somebody made and said, hey, Jim, you know, you have this background in public health. And of course, the coronavirus, this is about a few weeks ago, was just becoming news. You know, are you guys doing anything about it? And we, you know, the answer was no at that time. So, you know, Ben and I looked into the problem and you know, and just thought, well, if we are going to do this, and clearly there are other dashboards and trackers, such as the one at Johns Hopkins, what is it that we could potentially add value on that would make any kind of a difference? And really our thinking was, what if we could aggregate at a global level and bring in certainly the clinical data sources from CDC and WHO and others, but also possibly non-clinical data sources such as Twitter and Google Trends and things like this. But also, what if we could blockchain enable it? So there is clear computational data provenance, where the data is coming from, what we are or are not doing to it, and that can be proven in real time using our existing visualization and kind of secure file ingestion tools. So that's what we've done. That's really kind of a long-winded scenic tour of how we got there.
We definitely want to come back to that data provenance. You did hint at sort of previous manifestations of your business relationship with Ben. When you were last on the podcast, you were talking about a different healthcare use case. You were talking about supply chain shortages for drugs and using Hedera to track those supply chains, I guess, give transparency into those shortages. So clearly healthcare is your focus, and you'll be looking for other use cases in healthcare, and where appropriate, blockchain enabling them or Hedera enabling.
Yeah, Jim, could you talk a little bit about, your prior experience in the healthcare field and what makes you kind of qualified to approach them from, how can blockchain help as a technology?
Yeah, absolutely. And those are very good questions. And certainly what we're doing right now, Paul, to your comment, is one of several potential use cases. Certainly the supply chain one is a classic one. In healthcare life sciences, it's a highly regulated industry where even information supply chain, needs to have some degree of kind of regulatory compliance, right? So certainly what we're doing right now is just one of many. But yeah, just kind of to your comment, Cooper, my background as core of the team is fundamentally as technology developers and architects. And, I for a long time, I was the CEO of a company called Our Media that I started with a couple of my friends back in the early 2000s and really grew it to a pretty successful company. But that was the genesis of my background, and that company and the team that we kind of eventually spawned into Acoer really was technology developers. However, technology developer did not a healthcare software make, just to paraphrase. I think, it's a little bit sad, to be honest, because I feel like there are both real and perceived barriers to entry to healthcare, which in some ways propagates and elongates kind of mediocrity in this space. Many startup founders I've spoken to in advising them over the course of time have shied away from healthcare and generally highly regulated industries because they think it's somewhat difficult or very difficult to get into, and the clients typically go back to the same small pool of quote qualified providers and things like this. And I think that is somewhat true because you do have to have some degree of expertise and domain knowledge. However, I think it's largely perceived, and these are like barriers that create really kind of moats for the incumbents. And incumbents, unfortunately, in healthcare, and is very easily evidenced by looking at the data, such as in the US, almost 19% of our gross domestic product goes to healthcare. Is by far the least efficient and least effective healthcare system. We pay over $10,000 a year per capita in medicine and healthcare costs, et cetera. I mean, the numbers are just shocking. So when you add it all together, I think you see, and again, as an insider, kind of being in this industry for a little while, I saw this, that there's very low incentive for the incumbents to truly innovate because they make a lot of money through opacity, through inefficiencies. And I think that's one of the ways in which they also protect the moat from new entrants and startups and innovators who really want to make a difference. But all to say, going back to kind of how, who are we and why is it that we think, we actually get healthcare, it's really the fact that we have spent, I think, the last 4 or 5 years, certainly myself, Ben, and a number of the core team within healthcare, right? I was at the CDC for a couple of years. I was hired as an entrepreneur in residence to really very specifically help modernize and improve the scientific applications there. And then I was hired as the first chief software architect, the division I was at. And then the last 2 years also kind of being spent largely in the pharma life sciences space. I think by doing this and really being within the industry, I think what we've learned is really the insider's view of some of the problems and some of the areas in which there's opportunity, but also, and perhaps very importantly, if not most importantly, the connections, right? The connections in terms of knowing who are the right subject matter experts to speak to and to learn from and collaborate with very specifically. Where are the data sources? What are the issues in terms of siloed data and siloed applications? All of these things. Unfortunately, these are not very easy to kind of come by knowledge and insights unless you really spend the time in there. And that's really been kind of the background. And I think without having had this experience and collectively really been on the inside, looking outside, it would be difficult now when we're on the outside to try to innovate to really be able to get it and really be able to connect with the right people.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Jim. Really hearing that kind of self-fulfilling prophecy of how people feel there's maybe an imaginary burden or hurdle to entry into the healthcare field. Hearing you say that there's kind of an immense room for innovation because of that, and how you came from the CDC and stepped out and now are trying to fill in those gaps and actually help out the industry, seeing where blockchain can actually enable or provide some unique value rather than just trying to latch it on as a tool or something like that is really insightful.
To that point, Jim, when I think about the defining criteria for a DLT use case, I think there's generally some sort of adversarial dynamic or a competitive dynamic where it's in one party's best interest to lie about something. Am I naive to think that for a global health crisis like the virus, that everybody would pull together and we wouldn't have that adversarial dynamic? What are we preventing, or what lies are we preventing by inserting Hedera into that flow of data you described?
Yeah, you actually latched onto a really interesting kind of concept, one that we could spend probably an entire podcast on. And I'm sure probably could bring Lehman in as well and have him provide his expertise, because this really gets into the heart of game theory. I'm sure you guys are probably already aware. I'm a big fan of the public DLT. I think when you look at public manifestation of blockchain or distributed ledger technology, that's where you can truly impute computational trust and use token economics and game theory to really provide the right kind of checks and balances and overall network security to get there. But this idea of kind of the adversarial stance, is definitely true. And it's one that you see not just, in the case of an infectious disease outbreak, where many governments and entities and organizations do information blocking, right? And they have incentives to do so, and incentives, political incentives and other kinds of incentives to dampen the information. But, and this is to me the really exciting thing, there is also a counterweight of using cooperative game theory and cooperative solutions to essentially come up with alternative answers, where you provide incentives for data or information that can come from any number of sources, not necessarily just from, if you like, epidemiologists in this case for infectious disease outbreak, where that data can be triangulated and vetted to be accurate, even more so than from the quote authorities, or perhaps to provide a counter view that then could be separately analyzed through machine learning or what have you. So I think there is room for both. And I think that's, if you look at the game theory behind token economics, there's really kind of two factions to it, right? That there's the adversarial game theory, but there's also the cooperative game theory. And I think to me, that's the exciting stuff about public DLT. And that's where I see Hedera really being a shining example of what can be done. Because not only can you do these things and experiment with them, you can get near real-time results, and you can correct course as you go, and you can have a real feedback loop built into your applications. And that's pretty hard to do, right? It's very hard to do that without, quote, trusting an entity or an arbitrator or some kind of an intermediary. And I think that's what people, again, based on what I've seen with the coronavirus, we hear from a lot of people in China, as example, who have reached out to us and said, hey, we like what you guys are doing, but the data is under-exaggerated, and we see a lot more. And I think it would be amazing using Hedera and using public DLT to triangulate data from people on the ground and from different sources and show the provenance of that and show differing sources and then, leave it to the experts, to analyze it. Right? We are not experts in public health, but we are experts in large-scale data and managing real-time data. So making those tools available for the right experts to then opine on, what really is making sense.
So yes, definitely. Let's get Lehman on next time. That's a powerful concept, right? Making it worthwhile and presumably easy for all those other sources to feed their data, their opinion into that data sink for that analysis and do so in a immutable and trustless manner. Powerful idea.
Absolutely.
So, Jim, if you were to come up with some type of incentive model, specifically in this case, what might that look like? And what types of challenges might you deal with authenticating and, validating that data both as the kind of technology provider or as someone like the CDC or the World Health Organization trying to consume, what you guys are positioning as a trusted data source?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good question. I think there are a number of ways to incentivize participating and in this case, providing data and providing good data and not trying to game the system. I read a report from, I believe it was McKinsey about a year ago, and they had done some in-depth study and questionnaires and things around this topic of like, what would it take essentially for an average person, a patient, if you like, in healthcare to change their behavior, and take some of these extra steps. It wasn't specific to blockchain, but essentially to provide information that they wouldn't necessarily do otherwise for the common good. And I think what they saw was if they could get essentially financial incentives, even as little as a 10% improvement, right? So not a significant improvement in the fitness of the model, right? So I think that's one that certainly is one that we can noodle on is financial incentives. But I think in the world of healthcare, because there is a long tail and there are many different kind of like pods on the road that are part of this eco. There could be reimbursements, there could be treatment options, there could be educational elements. There's all kinds of things that you could add, as potential incentives, and also you can make it very specific to a particular population group or even an individual, right? You could use an idea of a token, right? When we were at the CDC, I kind of kicked around this idea of a public health coin, a PH coin, if you like. But depending on the scenario, the context. So for instance, if there was a natural disaster where immediate response, immediate good information is paramount importance, right? The weighing, if you like, the rewards of good data would be significantly higher than if you're doing kind of your garden variety population health survey, right? For a chronic disease. So you could use the same essential token, but with different weights and different contexts to incentivize people. So I think, that's one of many ideas. There's lots of, I think, very strong, well-informed, if you like, ideas around this by various economists and token economic experts on this, and which is not necessarily my area of expertise, but certainly I'm an amateur enthusiast, if you like, in this area. Going back to the question of Cooper, of like, okay, great, you're incentivizing people, but then how do you make sure the data is good? So that's a challenging thing in general, regardless of whether it's healthcare or public health or any other scenario, because as you all know, blockchain, DLT, we're talking kind of virgin digital territory. However, the actual data, is almost always, in this case, non-digital, it's analog, is off the chain, right? It's not, if you're using, as an example, if you're tracking containers that have shipment of medicine, well, that's a physical thing, right? And there are barcodes and things like this. So what you're relying on is the actual people, who are using whatever mechanisms, the apps or barcode readers or whatever, to do their job and do it correctly and not try and game the system. I think for that, I think, again, to me, this kind of goes back to the transparency and real-time reporting elements and building compliance in as part of these applications, right? And then really kind of experimenting, doing some A/B testing, if you like, to see what actually works in terms of kind of affecting humans' behavior to do the job properly. Because if we have garbage on the blockchain, now we have tamper-proof garbage forever, right? So that's not helping anyone. So I think it's not an easy one. It is contextual to me, and we have to kind of look at the specific scenarios. But I think there are definitely some ways in which you can improve the odds, right? And also in ways where, for instance, if you have a number of stakeholders within a particular life cycle of data, right? You could take that kind of the counterfeit medicine use case, if you like, and there are distributors, there are pharmacies, there are manufacturers, and there are finishing kitchens. All kinds of entities are involved. What you could do is incentivize good data by essentially, if the data is vetted at the end by some expert or regulator inspector, then they get if you like, their payment. But if there's even one element of bad data, then everybody loses. So that could very quickly, essentially weed out bad actors, because then everybody suffers from that. It's just a theory, but, again, also say, I think there are lots of ways of going about doing that.
Yeah, I think identity could only help, right? Whether it's the fact that you hinted at it earlier when you talked about potentially pulling in tweets. If the account from which a tweet claiming some outbreak of disease or came from an account that was 3 years old, then you might give that more credibility than one that was created the day before. Or maybe even explicitly somebody reporting data has a credential that asserts to some medical qualifications, and so add veracity or potential for veracity to that data stream.
To me, it kind of reminds me of the Oracle problem, but in this case, your real challenge is, how do I get people's data off-chain, on-chain, rather than just, a traditional API or an endpoint. And so, when you talk about adversarial and kind of incentivizing models, it almost seems like a staking type of model that you see in Oracles could be pursued in that case, but I'm sure it's a very quickly moving field for you, Jim. How long do you think it would take for individual people in the healthcare field that aren't as convinced about blockchain and distributed ledgers to see some of these kind of core value propositions that we're talking about here?
It's a good question. And I purposely didn't kind of get into the area of the identity management in the prior response, because I think if you are going to go down that path, it is quite tricky, and you really need to go down the path of decentralized identifiers and possibly self-sovereign identity. However, as you guys, I'm sure, are equally aware, that is a space that's moving, is immature. Most importantly, from my perspective, and Cooper, kind of relating to your question, that there's significant usability issues, right? And I think the usability issues are really ultimately what's impeding the average user, if you like, who's on their phone. And unless, I think, to all intents and purposes, the average user, even in faraway places, like, for instance, people think, in Africa, people are, devoid of these technologies, and they have a very rudimentary lifestyle, but it turns out it's actually anything but the truth, right? In Africa, the population is extremely young, and they're all used to smartphones and mobile phones. So all to say, I think it's a usability question. It's one where, if we are going to have, like, this idea of decentralized identification and key management for the average user to be able to use it and interact with a blockchain, if you like, or through an application with blockchain, that really needs to be abstracted. That needs to be, the complexity of that needs to be hidden away through smart design or through some other ways. Maybe it's biometrics that's tied to some kind of an application or whatever, or even the combination of the physical device that you have, as one element of the trusted component. But we're just not quite there right now with that. I think it's one that I think is going to evolve and quickly, but it's one that, as designers of applications, I think we really need to think about, because it could become the last mile issue that actually leads to the whole idea not really taking off.
With respect to the trustedness of data, I can sort of almost, again, naively imagine in your UI just simple visual indicators of a given bit of data was untrusted for some reason, didn't validate against its hash as stored in the ledger. And that's ultimately all the users care about, right? They want some manifestation of the underlying trust, like the lock icon in a browser, some simple visual indicator to help them assess the credibility of information.
Yeah, precisely. And that's a good way of describing it, Paul, is, abstracting out the complexity, showing something that's relatively intuitive, and if somebody wants to interrogate it, whether they use it directly or their representative or auditors or whatever, they can do so. But ultimately getting to a point where they can trust that basic usability and the symbology and not have to worry about the quote mumbo jumbo.
The mumbo jumbo that the three of us base our careers on.
Exactly.
It's good mumbo jumbo, but it is.
Yes.
Someone's got to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, not joking around. I think I really see our job, like what we do at Acoer, as abstracting out some of those mumbo jumbo. But when needed, when people want to, absolutely showing it to the level of detail that proves what we're trying to claim.
Yeah, absolutely. Jim, thank you very much for sharing with us what you're doing at Acoer around the coronavirus, but in more general for healthcare. Thanks so much for joining us today, Jim.
That sounds good. I really appreciate your time, Paul and Cooper, and great to talk to you guys always.
Yeah, we love what you guys are doing.
Thank you for listening to Hedera Hashgraph's Gossip About Gossip. If you liked the episode, please subscribe, rate and review, and also share and tell your friends.
Or connect with us on social media like Twitter, Instagram, etc. at Hashgraph, particularly if you want to leave us feedback on the podcast. We look forward to hearing from you.